Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. I'm taking a moment to say thank you to everyone who's been sharing episodes and kindly giving us good ratings. We'll keep bringing you entertaining and informative episodes, which means this week we chat with Sonali Shah from Invicti Security about the dangers of treating shift left as a buzzword. In the news segment, Go adds vuln management, fuzzing finds command injection, Exchange finally sheds basic auth, the future of pen testing, supply chain hardening, and more. Grab a friend and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. It's the show to learn the latest tools, techniques, and processes necessary to understand DevOps, application security, and cloud security. Your trusted source for the latest application security news. It's time for Application Security Weekly.
Your organization is building and updating business-critical web applications faster than ever. And with so much pressure to move fast, you may find yourself making trade-offs between innovation and security. Now you can build fast without sacrificing security with Invicti, the application security platform that helps your dev, sec, and ops teams work together to secure every website, web app, and API. With unparalleled accuracy, coverage, and automation, Invicti scales like no other AppSec solution. Discover why many of the world's largest organizations innovate securely with Invicti. Visit securityweekly.com/Invicti. The shift to remote and hybrid work over the past 2 years has accelerated application development on cloud infrastructure. However, securing these new assets has lagged behind. Qualys CloudView, the next generation cloud security posture management, delivers an end-to-end multi-cloud security and compliance solution encompassing the entire application lifecycle from build to runtime. CloudView enables enterprises to assess their cloud security and compliance posture, identify risks and gaps, auto-remediate issues, proactively enforce best practices, and prove compliance in audits rapidly and efficiently. Identify your most vulnerable cloud assets by visiting securityweekly.com/Qualys. Businesses need API protection that goes beyond signature matching and can stay ahead of attackers and their various tactics and tools. They need a solution that is more patient and prepared than a modern attacker and can track their actions over time. ThreatX is the only API attack protection platform that delivers on the promise of stopping API attacks in real time while giving you the visibility you need to prepare for future attacks. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/ThreatX. This is episode 211, that's 211, recorded September 12th, 2022. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with John Kinsella. Hello, John.
Mr. Shima, it's good to see you. Hope everyone's doing well and staying safe.
Indeed, good to see you too. It's also good to see Joe South. Hello, Joe.
Hey, how's it going?
Going quite well because it's another Monday with all of you. And another Monday of one more announcement, and then we're going to start talking with our guest. But first, don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. A seasoned business and product leader, Sonali Shah brings more than 20 years of B2B SaaS and cybersecurity sector experience, having led product management, marketing, and strategy teams at companies such as Human, formerly White Ops, Veracode, BitSight, and VeriSign, among others. Skilled at leading teams with a proven track record in bringing innovative solutions to market, she will be building on Invicti's long history of innovation, transforming the application security market with its NetSparker and Accunetic solutions. Hello, Sonali. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me.
It's wonderful to have you here because you're going to help us get into applied security as much as application security in the sense of AppSec has a lot of phrases it loves to use: zero trust, supply chain, and shift left. And, I kind of teased in the beginning that shift left easily could be in danger of becoming a buzzword. Yeah, we're shifting left. So you're here to help us maybe pull people back from the edge or push people perhaps or shift people around so we're treating shift left correctly. So maybe we just start with that broad question about what does shift left mean, or perhaps what should shift left mean so it's something that's a value?
Yeah, great question. So, to us here at Invicti Security, we think of shifting left and shifting right. And what that means is embedding security within the entire software development lifecycle, all the way from code design to development to testing, and then again, making sure it's secure in production. So when people say the term shift left, it assumes you've already shifted right. And the issue, though, is that people somehow forget about it. Some people may have shifted right and now are shifting left. There are others who haven't done anything. And, they're sort of this shift left buzzword. I think it's a good thing to shift left and to test early and often, but you can't forget the right. And I would say really the most important thing is making sure you're embedding security everywhere, right? Left and right.
Yeah, and I guess part of it too is that, as you pointed out, maybe you haven't shifted right, or maybe you're just standing up security in the first place, but you may already have some applications already in production, already deployed, that you can't quite retroactively shift left or go back in time, despite my love of TARDIS and Doctor Who, to go add that. So maybe there's a couple paths we could take here, but let's imagine that somebody an organization does want to start that shift left. Where would they start, or what would be the smarter way to start, where we're going to say, yes, we're going to invest in shift left in a way that's going to put us on a good path, meaning we'll have secure applications?
Yeah. So a couple of things there. I think the first thing that we suggest to all of our customers is just do an inventory. What are the applications you have today, applications and APIs in development and production, right? Because if you don't know what you have, you can't secure it. And rarely have I met a CISO that has known exactly how many applications and APIs he or she has, both internal facing and external facing. So I think just starting there. Then, within application security, there's a number of places you can start. What we recommend is the easiest place to start is with the applications already in production, because those are the riskiest. They're already out there. And it's very quick and easy to do a dynamic application security testing scan, because you don't require the source code. You just point and shoot, and quickly and with high accuracy, you can get an inventory of all your vulnerabilities and then start prioritizing them and fixing them. Once you have that in place, and that's embedded within the development and operations team's processes, then we recommend that you start scanning earlier in the life cycle. So that means, DAST, which is again dynamic application security testing, can be done pre-production, so right before you launch. Then you have IAST, which can also be done, interactive application security testing, which can be done before launch, and static application security testing, SAST, and SCA, software composition analysis, that focuses on open source. So there is a role for all of these tools throughout the supply chain, throughout the software development lifecycle, with SAST being the earliest. Right, that is something that you can test even when the developer's writing in the IDE. You can trigger a DAST scan, all the way to a DAST scan, dynamic application security testing, all the way in production. So I think all of these are important, right? You need to cover first-party code, third-party code, open source code. But I think the best way to start is where your biggest risk is, and where it's easiest to do it, which is in production, and then slowly add additional tools like SAST and IAST and SCA early in the development lifecycle. But again, it all starts with first just knowing what your risk is.
Yeah, and I wanted to dive into that a little bit too, because you mentioned asset inventory. Once again, the one of the easiest problems to bring up, one of the hardest problems to solve. And you mentioned the different tools and where they fit in with that SDLC. But you're also focusing on that risks part, which is you don't solve risk, or you don't evaluate risk with a tool. I think tools tell you, I think this is really bad, or I think this is not bad. But they also don't necessarily know your environment, right? So what does shifting left, or even shifting everywhere, in that conversation to engage developers, how does that unfold successfully when you're trying to have those risk conversations that go beyond just, well, it's in prod, therefore it's risky, therefore fix everything that the tool finds?
Right. No, that's an excellent question. In fact, I would say that is the struggle that we see with most of our customers, is that they're scanning often. And, we've seen this trend where customers are going from scanning, a couple times a year to we've got a very large customer who wants to scan daily. We've got customers going from, protecting maybe 20% of their applications to now wanting to protect 80% of their applications. This is all great, right? And scanning in development, scanning in production, scanning early, scanning often. The issue, though, then naturally results is more and more findings, and how do you prioritize them? And you're absolutely right. There's a limit to what technology can do. The business context is often something that only the business has, right? So, what is the use of this application? And where what sensitive data does it have access to? Are there mitigating controls in place? Is there a WAF there that will block it if something bad happens? And so that's where what we like to do is automate as much as possible for our customers. So where they do put their time is on understanding risk and actually finding things, because that's stuff that only today humans can do.
That does also sound like one of the ways where you have to shift left, in the spirit of it's the development team, it's the product team responsible for knowing the context of their app and describing how critical it is, how important it is. Now, and actually was being careful with those terms because they may not have the security language to say this is a CVSS 7.2 with the type of phone, or this is our threat modeling. So I love that in spirit. Have you seen in practice AppSec teams, dev teams, business teams successfully putting that context around the business, or that business context around the app? Or are there some ways you would recommend that they can be more successful there?
Yeah. There are a couple of things. To be honest, it's hard to do, and I don't see anyone doing it very successfully. Yeah. AppSec is a journey. And, so I can share with you a couple of things we've seen. One is the developer or application security professionals can go into the tool and say, these are the applications that are most critical based on whatever their criteria are. So we have a function, a tagging function, where when applications, are scanned, when you're doing the policy, you can also tag and say, okay, this is critical, or, not as critical. So that's one way you can do it. But often what we find is that the person running the scan, by the time it's gotten to that point, they may not know the context. So that's useful. But again, you've got to know the context. And then if you've got thousands of applications, that can be pretty time consuming. The best way to do it is really upfront. So if you think about when you're developing a new application, you have the product manager describing the functionality. So I would like this application. Here's what the application should do. It should do X, Y, and Z for the user. This should be the outcome. These are the key features. And we've seen over time that product managers are focusing, generally they've just focused on feature or functionality. Now what we've added in is quality, right? Because QA is very important. Now what if you start adding in security? And you start just adding in, what is the context? What is it on the back end that this application will have access to? And if it's done very early on in the design phase, that then helps later on when you're starting to set the application testing profiles and saying, all right, based on the risk level, now this is how often we want to test. This is the priority with which we want to fix things. So I think that we're starting to see very, very early stages, but that requires an entire shift in mindset and sort of putting that security first mindset in place within organizations.
So let's dig into that a little deeper, Sonali. You mentioned that you sort of really briefly just touched QA, and I want to go back there for a second because I think that sort of walks into the rest of what you're talking about. Do you have, when someone's wearing that PM hat, can you think of like, what are you seeing people either put into specs or telling a dev team that they want as part of a requirement of like, we want you to what? It would be, I want you to QA 85% of this capability, or I want to make sure that this is mostly working before we go to prod, or have the QA person just like run a QA scan against it, or what does that look like? And then the reason I'm asking that, I'm not trying to see your QA credits, but like, how does that then turn into what should someone be thinking about when they're asking someone when they're asking that same product team, what should they be putting in from a security point of view?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily the product team deciding.
Well, you were just saying PM, right? So
right, but when is putting in the context of the application, right? That this is what it'll do and this is what it'll have access to, so that the security teams can use that information to create the policies. Does that make sense?
okay, so you weren't so much asking for, okay, where I got confused and you were talking about QA, you want quality of the product, but you're then saying from a security point of view, make the product, I will say, instrumented or have metrics in that the security team can use.
Exactly. So my point being that just as we think about, so to release secure code, right? Often developers will have, OKRs, release this functionality, right? And same thing with product management teams. Instead of just saying this is the functionality, we should also say that it should, definition of done, not just meet these criteria in terms of functionality, but also have passed these tests or have passed these scans and with no high severity vulnerabilities. So including both QA and security in that definition of done and in the goals that are developed that are used for developers and security teams and product managers, tying that all together helps build that culture of security. And it's where security is thought of early on.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah, I was going to expand on that because it sounds like we've heard with only a few exceptions, security and quality tend to be, or security, I've heard a few ways of it being lumped into the quality aspect. And there, I was actually curious to also go down that route of metrics in the sense of we can have an idea of what quality looks like in the sense that you call it uptime, call it also even just the user experience, seeing how people interact with it with the UX. They understand a new design change. They're clicking on buttons better. I'm curious when that when you do see security kind of rolled into that aspect of quality, are there other metrics you've seen beyond just, don't have some high vulns or a scan has been run in the sense of security speaking to something about the design or security speaking something about the context of the application?
Yeah, it's really hard to measure security because you don't know how many breaches you may have stopped, right? So the usual metrics often are, how many scans have occurred, how many applications have been scanned. But I think that as companies get more and more mature, really what they want to measure is risk and risk reduction. And so one of the metrics, I think that's a good representative of that, is time to fix. And that includes time to find and fix, because if you haven't found it, you can't fix it. So a lot of times you'll have, all right, maybe scans will be done in 30 minutes and you'll have all the findings, but if they just sit there and they're not fixed for a couple of weeks or months, that time that you've left that where the app is vulnerable is pretty large. So you reducing that time where the application is vulnerable, I think, is a really good metric. It's hard to measure, but I think it's a really good one because you're never going to have. Well, I shouldn't say this, but I think it's very unlikely that you're going to never have zero vulnerabilities. It's more a matter of how quickly can you find and reduce and fix the risk.
Yes, much more in ability or agility to respond quickly. And I think that's more. I'm always more impressed by a metric or a team that can point to, yeah, we had this vuln, we tested with confidence, and we rolled it out within the same day, as opposed to this is part of our 7-day or a 30-week release cycle. I think some of that comes to something part of what you were alluding to as well when you're talking about quality and security leading up to that. Was change of behaviors. I'm going to throw the culture label on there because we're talking about adding a tool or using tools or shifting everywhere, so to speak. But I think none of this is actually predicated. Nothing what we're saying means the tool means you shifted left. That just meant you spent it. You spent left. You shifted your budget around, perhaps. But it's the culture that comes out of using them. The culture of processes that perhaps demonstrates better that you've done this type of shift. So with that long preamble out of the way, what have you seen for establishing that culture so developers are recognizing, perhaps without explicitly being told so, that they have become more responsible for security, or they are just doing those security behaviors as part of a quality control, for example, or just something else?
Yeah, I think that the culture has to come from the top down. So it has to be something that, again, going back to my example of, developers will have OKRs, quarterly objectives, that'll say, release these features. But if you've got security built into that, then you have permission to not release something and delay it slightly because there's a high severity vulnerability in an application that has access to sensitive data. Right. So I think one is just creating this culture has to come from the top down. That's one thing. Another thing is providing training to developers. We've all seen, the stats out there where, there's a shortage of security professionals. And then on top of it, you've got developers who haven't necessarily been trained in security. So how are you going to expect them to write code securely if you haven't trained them? And it's not necessarily something they've learned. So, building training in to the time. Maybe it's part of when you're onboarding folks or doing, regular refreshes. But again, that has to be part of the culture because you've got to give developers the time to take that training. And then another thing we've seen work is security champions programs, which is generally, again, going back to this idea that there's always a shortage of security folks. But if you can use developers to become security champions, to get to, ones that, it gives them an opportunity to learn more about security, work more closely with security, and then be that person on the development team that people can go to with questions. Building those programs is sort of another thing we've seen. Again, these are all more cultural things rather than actually, new tools, but more cultural things that you can do to create that environment that allows companies to shift left and shift right.
Yeah, security champions is definitely another one of those areas that is, I'll just say, mixed success, perhaps, or people have tried, many people have failed, and some have just created a champion who happens to be, this is the security person, this the default vuln assignee as opposed to the security champion. So, what do you have some advice on how to turn this developer into someone who's that liaison for security, or that actual champion for security, rather than the default assignee for, hey, new bug, scanner just found something, it's your job to fix it?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. A few months ago, I was talking, I was visiting some customers in Europe, and a very large bank there was telling me, our customer there was telling me about his security champions program, and said that he had just read so much about, or heard from colleagues in other banks, that it's really hard to do, and a lot of sort of false starts. And he was really amazed at how the program that he had recently launched was successful, and there was a lot of interest in it. And so I asked him exactly that. What did you do? And one of the first things is he said he made it very clear that when they launched this program, that this is something that developers volunteer for, and he made it clear that although it's a volunteer program, we're going to make sure it's part of your job description. So it's not on top of everything else you're doing. So also then goes back to culture, right? This is important enough that we're going to make it part of your job description and make sure that you're doing less in other areas so you can focus on this. That was one thing. The other one was this aspect of training, and what he heard from developers who volunteered for this program was that security is a hot space that we're actually really interested in. We do want to, we take pride in our code, and we want to make sure it's secure. And then also being able to put on LinkedIn or their resume that they're a security champion, right? That helps in, future jobs, because everybody wants, more security professionals. You can't find them. Well, if you can find developers that are good at application security, that's a big plus. And then I would say the last thing was sort of showcasing this. So, when you do, we do sprint reviews, right? Where you talk about features that have been released. Well, if you start talking about security in those and showcasing security successes, that that also builds that culture and makes more people want to be included in it. And so that was just, I thought there was a lot of good points that this customer had brought out.
Definitely a fan of teaching any developer more security and having that just development background, that development mindset. In other words, that mindset of how software is built and how it can go wrong just from people making mistakes, bugs, and what have you, and just adding that attacker-minded aspect on it as well. I think that speaks to a little bit of that, perhaps call it the shift everywhere mentality you're talking about at the beginning, because we talking about training, SAST for that matter too, security champions. A lot of that sounds very early on in the SDLC. So these are very left hand side of the timeline, if you will. Have you seen that? Or what have you seen in terms of like maybe developers and application security folks, either cross training or that developer mindset within AppSec manifesting on that, call it the right-hand side of things when applications are in production? Let's jump over there just for a little bit and say, you mentioned DAST, that's one of the things to do. Are there other good behaviors, good culture, or good practices that we shouldn't be forgetting about on this right-hand side of the SDLC?
Yeah. So we started very early on talking about discovery, so knowing your attack surface. And we actually do a scan every day for our customers to see what's actually in production, because so often applications are released and our customers, the CISOs or app security teams, may not even know about it. So on the right-hand side, it's always sort of, doing this discovery, understanding your attack surface, and then making sure you use tools that can automate the process. So whether it's scanning, every night or every weekend, whatever it is, making sure that it's automated so that nobody has to trigger the scans, they're automatically run, and then results are coming back into the developer environment. And developers understand that based on certain criteria, they have 24 hours or 1 week, whatever it may be, to remediate the situation. So I would say the automating it is super important both on the left and the right, but making sure that it fits into, is integrated into the tool chains, into the tools that both security development and operations teams use.
I think we lost him for a second. Go wait for him to come back in.
Sorry, I'm back. My apologies. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay. I can hear you. Sorry, I just...
No, you were perfect. So no. He dropped right as you...
Yeah, I think that was my side.
Okay.
So I asked a question and hopefully it was a wonderful answer as usual.
I don't know. John, you looked very suspicious a couple of times when I was talking.
No, I think how you're, and I don't want to interrupt the flow of what we're doing, so we can pick back up in a second. It's how you are describing some of these things. It's just how we're thinking about them is different. It's not that you're wrong or anything. It's making me think. It's not so much a suspicious look. It's that's an interesting way to think about it. Look, so yeah, you're fine.
Yeah, but if it's confusing, let me know, because
not confusing. No, just different.
Because I don't want the listeners to be confused. I may be using the wrong words.
No, you're totally fine.
All right.
So I didn't have a follow-up question on that, or else I would have just kept going with it. But Mike, I don't know if you had one. I'm presuming you do.
No, well, the last before I disappeared, I heard I was the how do we do what's the shift right? So that was kind of the jump I was making, and unfortunately, Sonali, I missed your answer. So we can pick up, I guess. Whatever the best segue is, where we just awkwardly say, "Oh, Mike is back," or if John, you had a follow-up question just to continue to segue us into.
Don't, unfortunately, I was happily listening.
Right. Okay, well then I can just say apologies. I will blame it on the cats, because actually I'll have to send a picture. The cat was standing over my cable modem, and I think that's what happened. So apologies, my internet disappeared. This is one of the few dangers we run into, the hazards of doing all this online recording. But thanks for your patience, Sonali. I was asking about, with my math geekery, I'm using this left-hand side, right-hand side language, talking about the SDLC. We're talking about shifting everywhere. And I think I was really just want to pick up perhaps that aspect of processes, because may lean into the idea of tools aren't going to solve our problem. We're talking about culture, and culture is definitely about the people aspect. Let's bring in some of the processes aspect too, and that can touch on, honestly, going back to that design phase, threat modeling, tagging that sense of what's critical, or having these risk discussions. Are the ways of this is my long-winded way of asking short answers. I usually do this type of talking out loud. My apologies. Perhaps the better way to just say, are there good structures, good frameworks of ways to get into these types of shift left discussions, ways of just saying, we want to deploy a tool, but how do we talk about it? Or how do we talk about risk? How do we talk about something else? Help me out here. Make me stop talking.
So when you think about shifting left, right, and just generally in application security, it's not just the security team that is responsible for it. You've got dev, sec, and ops. And so I think at the very beginning, it's got to be a conversation with all of these teams and having them involved in deciding what you're going to do, which apps you're going to scan first, which technologies you're going to use first. In a lot of, when we sign up large enterprise customers, they'll often do a proof of concept. And increasingly, we see developers in the room because they're the ones that are going to be using it. So I think getting that buy-in really early on is very important. And then another thing I would say is automate this as much as possible. So once you've figured out what you're going to do, look for tools that allow you to automate. Now, one thing to be careful about is if you automate and you've got poor results, then it's sort of garbage in, garbage out, and that's when you lose trust, right? So if there's a lot of false positives, that's great. You've automated the scanning, you've automated the workflow into, say, Jira, but it's a bunch of false positives. Developers waste their time looking at those, and then that just actually sets you back. So make sure that you've got quality tools with a high degree of accuracy, and then automate everything so that no one has to think about when do you start a scan. No one has to think about where do I go find the information to fix, or where do I find the vulnerabilities that have been found. Automate it as much as possible so that dev, sec, and ops, they never have to leave the environment they're already in. So we have customers that actually increasingly we've got customers that absolutely will use our product in our dashboard and come and see the results, particularly security leaders. They'll want to use the dashboard and all that. But increasingly, we see a lot of customers just using our API and integrating. So developers don't even know what tool they're using, or they don't have to come in and configure policies. It's just all entirely instrumented.
So I think that I like that aspect of not having to say our discussion is just about check Jira, check something else, check a checklist, basically. Mm-hmm. Maybe one final question I want to sneak in there is, what are the good discussions, the healthy discussions that those DevOps and AppSec teams should have that maybe indicates they're on a good maturity trajectory, or they have a higher maturity within this program? What do those discussions look like, or the type of things that they're concerned about?
It's a good question. Look, I see it in our own company, right? Even though we're an application security company, there's still a bit of conflict. Like, we want to release new functionality, but we also want to scan everything. So with our customers, I'm not in those conversations, right? So I can only share with you what I have observed in our own team is the best conversations are the honest ones, where developers have to feel comfortable saying, Sonali, this thing, is going to be delayed, and these are the reasons why. Now, we're a security company, so I obviously understand the implications, right? But having those honest conversations, so on the business side, they understand why things might take longer to develop, or things might get slightly delayed. The reality is even if you've got the best tools in the world that are, 100% accurate, fully automated, very easy and quick to use, security does, just like quality, add an additional layer that will slow down development. The idea is you want to reduce it as much as possible, so it's not slowing it down as much, but you've got to be able to have those honest conversations. I think when security teams say, okay, we're going to do the shift left, we're going to do the shift right. It's not going to impact you at all. That's just a lie, right? So this is open and honest conversations, I think, is what works best.
I definitely can't disagree with that. So, and I want to say thank you for bringing an honest conversation here. What's perhaps just one kind of on that topic? What's one last message, one last thought you'd like to leave with our listeners?
Yeah, I think it's just that application security is hard to do, and don't try and do everything at once. Pick one area where you want to start. Make sure you get the buy-in from the teams. Make sure you've got the culture. Show some success and then move on, right? So we deal with global organizations where often I see they'll start with, one division or in one team and show success, highlight that success, make a lot of noise around it so people understand why it's important. And if you roll out small and it doesn't work, fix it quickly, right? So just like we rapidly are releasing new features and innovating, same with security. If something doesn't work, try something else, right? But get that small success, broadcast it, earn the trust of the teams, and then roll it out. And, start right, start left, start somewhere is the key thing. Ultimately, you want to shift everywhere, but let's, this is a hard thing to do. Start small, make progress, win the hearts and minds, and then move forward.
Indeed. No, thank you very much, Sonali, for helping us and helping our listeners understand what some of that iteration could look like or should look like. Appreciate your thoughts on this.
Thanks for having me.
I want to thank John and Joe as well, and thank all of our listeners. To learn more about Invicti, visit securityweekly.com/Invicti. Now we're going to take a quick break and return with news of the week.